My name is Sloane Mercer, and I was 29 the year my family tried to sell me back to myself. They didn't use a contract or a closing table. They used a birthday cake, a rented hall, and a speech my mother had rehearsed in the bathroom mirror while I was still parking my car. I manage procurement for a hospital network that moves $40 million in medical supplies a year. I know how a purchase order flows from requisition to delivery the way most people know how to breathe. So when my brother called after 4 years of nothing and said Mom wanted to throw me a surprise party for my 30th, I should have asked one question before I said yes. Who's really paying for this cake? I didn't ask. I drove 50 minutes to the Riverstone Ballroom, walked through the double doors, and found 22 members of my family already seated at linen-draped tables, drinking champagne from a fountain they'd started filling before I turned off my headlights. My mother stood at the microphone, smiled, and said what I'd spent my whole life earning. "Sloane, honey, you're covering the hall rental, right? You owe us that much for missing so many birthdays." She thought she'd cornered me. She hadn't counted on the 3 sentences I was about to whisper to the event coordinator, or on what the ballroom's own invoice was about to tell the entire family 20 minutes later. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, to stay quiet, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me back up a few weeks before the party. Before the parking lot full of cars I recognized. Before my mother tried to hand me a bill the size of a down payment. I need to tell you who I was the morning the invitation arrived, because that's the version of me they were counting on, and the version I'd already stopped being. I manage procurement for a hospital network, not manage. I built my way up from filing invoices in a supply closet in Dayton when I was 19, still smelling like antiseptic on the bus home. Inventory clerk at 21, purchasing coordinator at 24, senior procurement analyst by 27, network procurement manager by 29. I'm not rich. I have a 1-bedroom condo that's half paid off, a 401k I started at 22, and exactly 1 indulgence. I buy the good coffee beans, single origin, $18 a bag, and I grind them myself every morning. My colleagues think it's a quirk. It's not. When you grow up covering the electric bill because your father spent the grocery money on lottery tickets, you learn to keep your own expenses small enough to walk away from. That morning, I was in my office reviewing a vendor contract for surgical gloves. The kind of Thursday that makes you forget not everyone's life runs on unit costs and delivery windows. My phone buzzed. I glanced down and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. 4 years of silence, and there it was, a text from a number I hadn't deleted because some part of me still hoped. My brother, Caleb. The message was warm, careful, almost rehearsed. He said Mom had been doing a lot of reflecting and wanted to throw me a surprise 30th birthday party at the Riverstone Ballroom. Just family, he wrote. Close family. A small celebration, a fresh start. Then a second message 45 seconds later with the line that should have told me everything. Family celebrates together, Sloane. It's time we remembered that. Family celebrates together. She used to say that when I was 16 and she needed my after-school paycheck to cover the water bill. She said it when I was 22 and Dad needed bail money for a DUI he swore wasn't his fault. She said it when Caleb's first wedding fell through and I quietly paid the non-refundable venue deposit. Family celebrates together had always meant one thing in my house. Sloane pays so the family can celebrate. I read the message twice. I noticed Caleb hadn't said sorry. He hadn't said we were wrong. He'd said it was time to heal. Passive voice, no subject, no one responsible. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the surgical glove contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 4 years ago, my brother Caleb decided to open a gym. Not a business plan, not a market study. A gym because he'd seen one in Austin with neon lighting and a cold plunge pool and thought, I could do that. He was 28, had never managed so much as a lemonade stand, and needed an $85,000 equipment loan. The bank said yes with a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. Mom called on a Sunday. Dad sat beside her, arms folded, already disappointed before I'd answered. Caleb needed the loan. The gym was his dream. I had good credit, a stable job, a history of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Sloane. I asked to see the business plan first. Caleb didn't have one. I asked about his projected membership numbers, his lease terms, his trainer contracts. Caleb stared at me like I'd questioned his manhood. Mom's voice went flat. He's your brother. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your brother. I said no. Not because I didn't love Caleb. I did. But I'd spent enough years in procurement watching departments pour budgets into initiatives with no foundation. And I knew what $85,000 of someone else's debt looks like at 3:00 a.m. when the gym is dark and the loan is still due. Dad stood up. He pointed at the door and said the thing that closed it for 4 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. The next morning, I'd been blocked on every family group chat. Nobody called. Nobody texted. For 4 years, I was the daughter who loved her career more than her own brother. Here's the part that's hard to admit. The silence almost broke me. Not because they were right, I knew they weren't, but because I missed being needed. That's the real wound. And it took me 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Okonkwo to name it properly. I had been the family fixer since I was 16. First paycheck went to the electric bill. Tax refund went to Dad's truck insurance. When Mom's transmission blew, I paid for the rebuild and told her it was covered under a recall because I knew she'd never accept a handout from her teenage daughter. When Caleb got married the first time, I covered the photographer, the DJ, and half the catering. And I smiled while Mom gave the toast about raising 2 strong kids. 2 strong kids, 1 bill. I didn't do it because I'm generous. I did it because I'd learned somewhere around age 15 that the fastest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure nobody had to ask twice. Ask once, Sloane pays, everyone's happy, dinner is quiet. I trained them. I taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt, receive check. And when the machine finally said out of order, they didn't troubleshoot it. They unplugged it and walked away. So when Caleb's text popped up after 4 years, family celebrates together, Sloane, I felt the old reflex fire in my chest like a muscle I hadn't stretched in years. Go fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make it quiet again. But I also heard Dr. Okonkwo's voice, steady as a metronome. You taught them you would always pay. That was your mistake to fix, not by paying more but by stopping. My colleague Priya told me not to go. She sat across from me at lunch the day after the invitation and said, Sloane, this has ambush written all over it. And I remember laughing because Priya had never even met my family and she could see it clearer than I could. My supervisor, Marcus, said the same thing. Don't walk into that ballroom, Mercer. But I'd already decided, not because I believed them, not because I expected an apology. I wanted to walk into that room and find out whether 4 years had changed anything or whether the silence had just been a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had. One where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I wanted closure, even if closure meant confirming the door was nailed shut. There was something else, too. And I'm going to be honest about it because I think some of you will understand. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated. Not the one who kept score. The one who taught me to make pound cake in a bundt pan when I was 10 and sang along with Patsy Cline while the batter mixed. That mother hadn't called in 4 years either. But some nights I still heard the Patsy Cline. So I told Priya I was going. I told Marcus I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing and almost believed it. I set one rule. One party, civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I'd leave before the cake. I wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to my dashboard the morning of. One party, then home. That sticky note was still there when I pulled into the Riverstone's parking lot and counted the cars. I dressed simple on purpose. Navy slacks. A cream blouse I wear to vendor negotiations. Low heels. No jewelry except the small gold bracelet I bought myself the year I made network manager. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I'd earned it and it kept good time, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Riverstone looking like I was performing. My family already thought I flaunted my success. The truth was, I drove a 7-year-old Subaru and meal prepped on Sundays like half of America. The drive took 50 minutes. I played no music. My hands stayed at 10 and 2. Somewhere around the highway merge, my stomach started to tighten in a way I recognized. The same feeling I get when a vendor shipment fails verification on a Friday afternoon and I know the next 6 hours are going to hurt. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still negotiating with. I almost turned around at the exit ramp. Almost. But I thought about that pound cake and I thought about Dr. Okonkwo's voice and I kept driving. The Riverstone Ballroom sat at the end of a commercial strip I hadn't visited in years. The expensive side of town, the kind of place where the parking lot is valet only and the event coordinators wear headsets. Dad's truck was in the third row, Mom's sedan next to it. Fine. Then I saw Aunt Marlene's Lexus, Uncle Doug's Tahoe, Caleb's Jeep with the bumper sticker from the gym that had closed 14 months after it opened. 4 more cars I recognized. 3 I didn't. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. Close family, Caleb had written. I counted 12 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, reading that sticky note. One party, then home. The smart thing would have been to reverse out of the lot and drive the 50 minutes back to my condo and eat leftover stir-fry and never think about the Mercer family reunion I hadn't been invited to, or apparently had been invited to, without being told the guest list. But I got out. I straightened my blouse. I locked the car and walked toward the entrance because I was 30 years old, and I'd spent 4 years learning how not to run, and I was not going to start running again in a ballroom parking lot on a Saturday evening. The front doors were heavy oak with brass handles, the kind that whisper, catering minimums start at $5,000 before you even see a menu. Inside, the lobby smelled like vanilla and warm linen and money. An event coordinator in a charcoal suit smiled and checked her tablet. Mercer. I nodded. She nodded back. Your party's already in the main hall. She said it the way coordinators say things when they've been dealing with a large group for an hour and are trying very hard not to look stressed. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself 1,000 times. She grabbed a name card, just one, and led me toward the double doors. I could hear them before I could see them. Laughter, clinking glasses, my Aunt Marlene's unmistakable cackle cutting through the murmur of every other conversation. One party, then home. I turned the corner and saw the hall. 22 chairs, every single one filled except the one at the near end, directly facing the microphone where my mother stood. The room stretched the entire width of the ballroom. White linen, heavy silverware, centerpieces of roses and hydrangeas in crystal vases. There were platters I could identify from 20 feet away, shrimp cocktails tiered on ice sculptures, carved roast beef on a silver station, a chocolate fountain in the corner, and along the back wall, a champagne fountain already flowing, bubbles catching the chandelier light. They'd been here a while. They'd been ordering hard. The coordinator paused at the edge of the hall and glanced at me with a look that translated perfectly across every event I've ever managed. Good luck. Then she leaned closer and said quietly, Your mother put a card down to hold the reservation. Just so you know, we require one for parties over 20. The deposit was $2,500. I filed that sentence the way I file every operational detail. Silently, completely, permanently. Her card was on file. She'd secured the room. And yet somehow I already knew the bill wasn't supposed to land on her. My mother saw me first. She stepped down from the microphone with both arms open and every head in the hall turned. Sloane, oh, sweetheart, look at you. Applause, actual applause, like I was a returning soldier and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 1,000 days. Uncle Doug whistled. Aunt Marlene dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Caleb raised his champagne flute and smiled, the kind of smile that has teeth but no warmth. 22 people, shrimp and roast beef and a champagne fountain. Close family, Caleb had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 22 people are watching you and the chair is already pulled out and a server is pouring water into your glass before your purse hits the floor? I sat down and I smiled because that's what 11 years of logistics training gives you, the ability to smile while your brain is running threat assessment at full speed. Mom settled back into her seat, beaming. We wanted it to be a surprise, the whole family together, just like old times. I thought it was close family, I said. Mom waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Well, once Marlene heard and then Doug and then your cousin Tanya, it just grew. You know how family is. I knew exactly how family was. I scanned the hall. Dad sat at a side table carving roast beef like it was Thanksgiving turkey. Caleb sat near the microphone, phone in one hand, champagne in the other, scrolling something I couldn't see. Aunt Marlene and Uncle Doug anchored the center table. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since a Christmas 6 years ago filled the rest. Tyler, Jenna, Jake, 2 spouses I'd met once, and Aunt Marlene's book club friend, who I'd never seen before in my life, but who was apparently eating shrimp on whatever occasion this was. The champagne was flowing. The platters were half demolished. They'd been here at least an hour before I arrived, and they'd ordered everything on the catering menu that didn't require a second mortgage. Mom leaned across and squeezed my hand. "See, family celebrates together." There it was again. The same 5 words delivered with the same warm packaging aimed at the same target. I squeezed back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My mother is the kind of woman who plans events for the table, not asks, plans. She waved a server over, a young woman barely out of her teens who looked like she was running on caffeine and anxiety, and rattled off additions without glancing at a menu. Another round of the shrimp cocktails, 2 more roast beef plates, and keep the champagne flowing. The good stuff, not the house. The good stuff. Loud enough for the tables on either side of us to hear. Mom pulled her credit card from her purse and held it between 2 fingers like a magician, showing the audience a coin before the trick. "Put it all on this," she told the server. "We're celebrating tonight." The server, her name tag read Aisha, scribbled and nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen with the look of someone who desperately wanted a break. I watched my mother tuck the card back into her purse with a little pat. The way you pat a dog that's performed well. Something was off. I'd grown up watching Mom clip coupons for cereal. I'd seen her return a blouse because the sale tag was missing. Linda Mercer did not order champagne fountains. She did not wave credit cards like flags. This was a performance, and it was aimed at me. "Look how well we're doing, Sloane. Look how little we needed you." Except the car in the parking lot was the same sedan from 6 years ago with a dent in the rear bumper she'd never fixed. And Dad's wallet, the leather bifold he'd carried since I was in high school, sat on the table beside him with a cracked corner held together by electrical tape. They were performing. I just didn't know the price of admission yet. The small cuts started around the 2nd hour. Aunt Marlene leaned across Uncle Doug and said, "Must be nice managing all those fancy hospitals while the rest of us clip coupons." She laughed when she said it, the way people laugh when they want you to know they're serious. Cousin Tyler, who I hadn't spoken to since the last election, chimed in with, "Yeah, Sloane, you really landed on your feet. That's awesome." Even Uncle Doug, who normally communicates exclusively through sports metaphors, managed a "you hit a home run out there, kid." Each compliment was a brick. Each brick pointed the same way. You have money, we see it. And we're reminding you in front of witnesses. Mom orchestrated from the center of the hall like a conductor who'd memorized the score. A nod to Marlene, a smile at Tyler, a gentle hand on Dad's arm when he started to speak too soon. She was good. She'd always been good. I used to think my mother was just a warm person who liked hosting. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 25-year track record, and her biggest deliverable was sitting at the near end of the hall drinking water. The dessert station arrived. Aunt Marlene ordered the chocolate mousse without looking at the price. Caleb asked for the creme brulee, which required a 15-minute lead time, which meant he'd ordered it before I sat down. Of course he had. They were running up the tab the way you run up a tab when someone else is paying. Without a ceiling, without guilt, without a single glance at the catering menus per person rate. My water was down to the ice. Caleb was the one who cracked the surface. He'd had 3 glasses of champagne by then, enough to sand down whatever filter he normally kept between his brain and his mouth, which was never especially thick to begin with. He leaned across the table, glass in hand, and grinned at me like we were sharing a joke. "Relax, big sister, it's just a party. You can afford it." I set my water down. "Afford what?" "This." He gestured at the hall. The platters, the fountain, the 22 place settings, the chocolate mousse and creme brulee currently being prepared by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." He said it so casually. "Since you're treating." Like it had been settled in a meeting I wasn't invited to, which of course it had been. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long until you're the one sitting in it. Mom shot Caleb a look that said, "Too early," and Caleb shrugged like he'd bumped a vase he didn't plan to pick up. Uncle Doug studied his shrimp. Aunt Marlene suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Dad cleared his throat. The silence lasted long enough for Aisha to arrive with a fresh pitcher of water and place it beside my glass, and for me to realize 2 things. First, that Aisha was the only person in this hall who had poured me something without expecting anything in return. And second, that Caleb had just confirmed out loud what every single person in this room already knew. I was the mark. This whole party was a heist, and every shrimp cocktail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for cousin Jenna when it landed. She was trying to make conversation genuinely, I think, because Jenna was the one family member who'd sent me a birthday card during year 2 of the silence, a short thinking of you that I'd never replied to and still felt guilty about. So, Sloane, Caleb said you're in charge of buying everything for a bunch of hospitals now. I kept it simple. Network procurement manager. 6 facilities, $40 million annual spend. Jenna nodded, impressed. That's amazing. You're in charge of all of it. Contracts, vendors, compliance, budgets, everything from the loading dock to the operating room. I said it the way I'd say it in a meeting. Factual, no polish. But the word budgets landed on that hall like a rock through a window. Aunt Marlene's fork stopped. Uncle Doug looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Caleb's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They'd built their entire evening around the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it, the scope, the authority, the specificity of what I actually did was different from assuming it. They'd pictured me as a well-paid secretary who'd gotten lucky. They hadn't pictured someone who could read a capital expenditure proposal faster than they could read a menu, who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house, who knew exactly, down to the cent, what 22 shrimp cocktails and 2 hours of champagne fountain service cost before the invoice ever arrived. The hall recalibrated. I could feel it happening like a change in barometric pressure. The power hadn't shifted yet, but it had loosened. Mom waited until the cake. She was strategic about it. I'll give her that. The creme brulee had arrived. The chocolate mousse was being passed. The champagne fountain was running low and the second tier had been switched to house brand, which nobody noticed because they'd stopped paying attention to what they were drinking. The hall was warm and full and slow with sugar and champagne, and every face was soft with the particular satisfaction that comes from a meal you didn't pay for and don't intend to. Mom stood up. She walked to the microphone, tapped it twice, and smiled at the room with the particular expression of a woman who believes she's being generous. "Sloane," she said, and her voice carried to every table. "You're covering the hall rental, right? You owe us that much for missing so many birthdays." 5 words. You owe us that much. 22 people heard them. Aisha, clearing a table behind me, heard them. The couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My father nodded. My brother smirked. My aunt reached for another shrimp like the matter was settled. "You owe us 4 years of silence." And not one person in that hall had said they were sorry, or that they had been wrong, or that they'd miss me for any reason other than my credit limit. You owe us that much. I looked at my mother across a hall covered in the wreckage of a party I hadn't planned, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the decision I'd been afraid to make had just been made for me, I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a hall of 22 people shift in their chairs and reach for their water glasses and suddenly remember they have something interesting to look at on the wall behind you. For 11 years, I'd paid so no one would make a scene. I'd picked up every bill, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit and every insurance premium and every photographer invoice because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one. Full of staring, expecting faces. Full of the unspoken understanding that Sloane's love was measured in dollars, and Sloane's silence was purchased with compliance. 11 years, thousands of dollars, and the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $75 a plate, plus champagne, plus shrimp, plus the particular tax that comes with being the child they only call when something needs funding. I looked at my mother's hands, still holding the microphone. I looked at my father's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Caleb, who was already scrolling again because as far as he was concerned, this was decided. I looked at Aisha, standing by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a young woman who knows something important is happening at her event but isn't sure what. Then I looked at my water half full, catching the chandelier light like a small, quiet promise I'd made to myself. I put my napkin on the table. I smiled. "Let me go take care of things," I said and stood up. Mom exhaled. Aunt Marlene patted her chest. Dad unfolded his hands. Every single one of them thought I was going to pay. Here's the thing. 11 years behind a procurement desk teaches you. The person who controls the invoice controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd set the hall, chosen the venue, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 22 people, 2 hours of champagne, and 4 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 3 sentences and a coordinator named Denise. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front desk. I walked toward the service station at the back of the hall where Denise was reviewing the event ledger and Aisha was organizing dessert plates. Denise wore the standard uniform, charcoal blazer headset, and she had the look of a woman who'd been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to her. I walked up to her. "Excuse me, Denise." She turned, professional smile. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low. Not dramatic, not conspiratorial, just the volume you use in the industry when you're handling something that doesn't need the hall's attention. Aisha was beside her, listening, eyes alert. Both of them looked at me the way event professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, precise attention. I said 3 sentences. "I'm not the host, and I won't be covering this event tonight. Please bring the full invoice to the woman at the microphone, the one whose card is already on file for the deposit. And split off just my water onto a separate check and add 30% to mine for your team. You've earned it tonight." Denise blinked once. She glanced at Aisha, then back at me. And in those 3 seconds, she read the situation the way a good coordinator reads every situation. Fast, thorough, without judgment. Then she nodded. "Done!" That was it. No argument, no hesitation, no "Are you sure, ma'am?" Because Denise had been doing this long enough to know what a redirect looked like, and Aisha had been watching that hall long enough to understand why one was needed. I paid my check on the spot. 1 glass of water, 2 refills, plus a 30% tip. That would be the largest Aisha had received in a month. Denise ran my card, handed me the receipt, and said quietly, "I'll present the event's invoice in about 15 minutes once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Caleb was arguing with Cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Marlene was telling Uncle Doug about her neighbor's fence dispute. Mom was watching me with the careful attention of someone who thinks the check has been handled. Dad was leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied. 22 people eating dessert, drinking the last of the champagne, waiting for a bill they had no intention of seeing. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those 15 minutes were the most peaceful of my evening. The hall didn't know it yet, but the party was over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the champagne was gone, the ask had been made, and the answer had already been delivered in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end and listened to my family talk. Aunt Marlene complained about the cost of mulch. Uncle Doug told a fishing story that had no ending. Caleb took a selfie with the chocolate fountain. Mom laughed at something. Cousin Jenna said a real laugh, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her sound for exactly 3 seconds like the woman who used to sing Patsy Cline in the kitchen. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I looked at Dad, who was checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting for a text he didn't want to receive. And I remembered the message I'd read on Caleb's phone. "Sloane can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." My water caught the chandelier light again. I watched the bubbles rise and pop one by one, each one a tiny implosion that nobody noticed. I thought about 16-year-old Sloane in her apron, bagging groceries after school, learning to smile through the burning in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. That girl would have pulled out her card and covered the whole hall and called it love and gone home and cried in the shower and never told anyone. I wasn't that girl anymore. Denise appeared at the edge of the hall, and I knew before she took her first step exactly whose chair she was walking toward. Denise placed the invoice folio, leather-bound, embossed with the Riverstone's logo, directly in front of my mother. Not in the center of the table, not near me. In front of Linda Mercer, the woman who'd made the reservation, whose card was on file, who told the server to put it all on this 2 hours ago. The hall conversation died like a candle in a draft. Mom stared at the leather folio for 2 seconds. I could see her processing. The invoice was supposed to go to Sloane. The invoice is in front of me. Dad's eyes went wide. He looked at me, then at the invoice, then at me again, and for the first time all night, his composure cracked enough to show the math running behind it. "Sloane," she started. Mom recovered first. She was good at recovering. She'd spent 61 years never admitting she was caught off guard. She picked up the invoice folio, opened it with a casual flick, and did not look at the total. She couldn't look at the total. If she looked at the total in front of 22 people, the performance would end. "I've got it," she said, pulling her credit card from her purse with the same two-finger flourish she'd used earlier. She handed the card to Denise without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember." Denise took the card. "I'll be right back, ma'am," she said it gently. The way you say things when you know what's about to happen and the person you're talking to doesn't. Mom leaned back, crossed her arms, smiled at me with the full confidence of a woman who believed her card would save her. Denise came back in 4 minutes. She stood beside my mother's chair. She leaned down and said at a volume designed to be discreet, but heard by a hall that had gone silent enough to hear ice melt. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." Nobody moved. Mom's smile held for one more second, a reflex like a light that stays on after you flip the switch. Then it went out. "Run it again," she said. Denise nodded. She disappeared. She came back in 2 minutes. Same lean, same gentle voice. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it's still not going through. Would you like to try another card?" Mom reached for her purse. Her fingers moved through the slots. One card, then another, then a third she pulled from behind her driver's license like a last bullet in a chamber she'd forgotten she loaded. She handed it to Denise. The hall was silent. 22 people, no forks moving, no champagne being poured, no laughter, just the sound of Linda Mercer's 61 years of pride compressing into a purse she couldn't close fast enough. Denise came back a third time. She didn't need to speak. Her face said it. Mom looked at Denise. Then she looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet. With the raw, unguarded expression of a woman who has just realized in front of every person who matters to her that the net she'd been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as hard as she'd always feared. She looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat that's pulling away from the ship. I picked up my water, took a sip, set it down. "I don't owe you. I never did." Mom's chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound like tearing paper. "Sloane." Her voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Mom. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank." "You were supposed to," she stopped herself, but not fast enough. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, visible to everyone. "You were supposed to pay." Dad started crying, not the quiet kind, the performative kind. The kind with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from adjacent tables. "After everything we've done for you," he sobbed. "After I carried you, how could you sit there and— What did you do for me, Dad?" My voice was level. I didn't raise it. I didn't lean forward. I stayed in my chair with my hands around my water glass. "Tell me in front of everyone, what did you do for me in the last 4 years? Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you." Aunt Marlene reached for my arm. "Sloane, dear, your mother is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just—" "No," one word. I said it the way I'd say it to a vendor who tried to short my invoice. Clear, final, and without apology. Then Mom broke, not with anger this time, with something worse. Her voice dropped. And for one moment, one terrible, honest moment, she sounded like a woman standing in a house with the lights turned off. "Sloane, please, we're drowning." I saw her. I saw the scared woman behind the performance. The mother who'd lost her husband's income and her pride and couldn't say it out loud until her credit card said it for her. I saw her and I ached. Then she added, "And you'd let us." And the ache stopped because even drowning, she was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. The way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling, I mean that. But this—" I gestured at the hall, the empty platters, the dry champagne fountain, the 22 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. "This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me to celebrate. You invited me to make a payment. If you need help, real help, I will sit down with you and a financial counselor and we will figure out a plan. No tricks, no audience, no shrimp. But I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it. I wasn't told about it and I don't owe it to you. I don't owe you. I never did." Nobody spoke. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother and I said the last thing I would say to her at that table. "You always told me family celebrates together, so why was I the only one who ever paid for the celebration?" Then I walked toward the door, past the busser, past the coordinator, past the heavy oak doors with the brass handles. Aisha caught me near the coat check. "Ma'am," she was holding my receipt. "Thank you," she said. Quiet, sincere, I touched her shoulder. "You're doing great," I told her again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. Saturday evening, warm air, cicadas starting up in the landscape trees that made the Riverstone look like it belonged somewhere more important than a commercial strip. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky note still pressed to my dashboard. One party, then home. One party. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in. Mom, Aunt Marlene, Caleb, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all of them typing at once. A cascade of exclamation points and accusations and the particular kind of fury that only comes from people who have been caught. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the notification confirm it. Sloane has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine and I drove home in the same silence I'd driven there. Except this time, the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night or the next day or the day after that. The group chat I'd left continued without me. I know because cousin Jenna, the one who'd sent the birthday card, reached out separately a week later. "I just wanted you to know," she wrote. "That was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family party in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it." Jenna was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Caleb texted, not to apologize, to ask if I could lend him first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished him well. He didn't respond. Through Jenna, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. Dad's contracting work had dried up 20 months before the party. Bad bets on 2 commercial bids that went sideways. Mom had been covering minimums on 5 credit cards with a home equity line that was now maxed. The house went on the market in August. They moved to a smaller rental in a town 40 minutes south. Caleb took a job at a call center answering phones. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made long before I walked into the Riverstone. And none of it was mine to fix. I did what I'd promised at the table. I called Mom 6 weeks later and offered to sit with her and a financial counselor. She hung up. I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence. And the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally got rich. That's my story. 22 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.